Well, for our final session of today's Investor Summit, a panel of leading financiers and investors will discuss the survival and growth of challenges of the SME sector. They'll also look at how pivotal the support by investors and banks is in guiding the transformational journeys of small businesses in 2021 and beyond. Leading this discussion will be Robert Tay, Cluster Director, Modern Services Cluster of Singapore's Infocom Media Development Authority. Joining him on the panel, Anthony Thomas, Chairman of Momo, and Haryanto Suryonoto, the SME Business Head of Danamon Bank, Golden Gate Ventures partner, Michael Lintz, and co-founder and CEO of Validus Capital, Nikhilesh Goel. To ask your questions to the panel, just click on the yellow button beneath the session window. Now over to Robert for this final panel discussion of our Investor Summit on the survival and growth challenges of the SME sector.
Good morning from Singapore, and as we close out day 4 and start day 5 at the Singapore FinTech Festival, I have the pleasure of being joined by Anthony, Michael, Nikhilesh, and Haryanto. It's my great pleasure to have Michael in the room with me today. So rare to have somebody in person. The topic for today is, are investors and banks doing enough for the SME sector? And before we get into that topic, I just wanted to give an opportunity to each of my panelists to do a quick introduction. Michael, you're in the studio. Why don't we start with you?
Thank you. My name is Michael Lintz. I'm a partner at Golden Gate Ventures. Golden Gate is an early stage VC based out of Singapore. We invest across Southeast Asia. We have done around 50 investments in the early stage tech industry, companies ranging in the healthcare, logistics, fintech, but also education.
In no particular order, I'll pass over to Anthony. Morning, Anthony.
Hi. So I'm with Momo, which is Vietnam's leading e-wallet. We are a super app with a wide range of use cases for consumer mobile payments, which range from top-ups to bill payments to merchant payments. So we integrated with a vast majority of the country's banks, telcos, utilities, and public services. Momo is accepted at merchants from large to small. So we start with the supermarkets, the convenience stores, the gas stations, but we move to retail establishments, including MSMEs, as well as we support both offline and online purchases. It goes, again, for the entire range. Beyond payments, Momo is building out its financial services business to enable lending, wealth management, and insurance through the platform. So with regard to SMEs, we see ourselves as an enabler by turning on payment acceptance, providing an opportunity to market and sell products or services through our platform, and eventually enjoy a full suite of relevant financial services.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And I'm just going to pass it over to Haryanto.
I'm Haryanto. I'm from Bank Danamon Indonesia, one of the top banks in Indonesia. As our vision is to enable millions to prosper, we are having focus on the SME and providing them with the financing. And also right now, we are providing them also with the solutions from digital perspective. Thank you.
And Nikhilesh, just to round up the panel.
Hey, thanks, Robert, and good morning, everyone. I represent Validus. We are one of the leading SME financing marketplaces in ASEAN, with presence across Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and just going live in Thailand. Our forte is supply chain financing, where we aggregate capital from accredited investors, could be high net worth individuals, family offices, hedge funds, credit funds, and the likes, and then channel it to SMEs for their unsecured working capital needs.
Earlier, the panel before us was talking about investments in the tech sector, and they were talking about valuations 15, 20, 30 times earnings. And I think that's amazing, the amount of growth that's been taking place there. But in the SME space, it's quite different. I mean, we've looked at 2020 as being a very, very challenging year. I think challenging is an understatement as to what many SMEs have gone through, particularly in this region. And as we look to 2021, they're going to continue to face these challenges. And the question is, and what we're going to address with this panel today is, how can we help them? Are we doing enough to support them? What else can we do in terms of recovery? And hopefully beyond recovery, potentially even growth. So I think the first question over to the panel is really, what do the SMEs need? And we looked at support in different forms. We looked at support, whether it was business support in terms of basic technology, whether it was equity support in terms of actually investments, or debt support, just getting enough money through the door to keep the business going. So I wanted to pass this on to Anthony, to start with you, please.
Sure. So we, just between us panelists, I think we have a range of solutions that we provide, and I would say that ours is kind of a foundational layer or something which feeds into the rest. So we start our point of takeoff is really payment acceptance, because a bank or a lender will typically look for some form of collateral, right? Property or assets, documentation, capability, etc. And an investor even looks for more, right, when it's equity. So we get started in remote, in minutes, remotely, where we are able to enable payment acceptance, because that's the beginning. So we start with identity, but it doesn't require a lot of documentation. It's just about really business registration. We accept payments, and with the data, we help enable further solutions, right? Part of it is also our range of merchant solutions, whether it's vouchers, digital vouchers to help drive traffic. We help enable a lot of SMEs who sell on Facebook, because payments for ads on Facebook itself is a pain point. So we enable that. And then SMEs can take advantage of our mini app platform, where not a lot of them can really spend a lot in showcasing their product, so they can use our app, which has millions of consumers coming in every month, to access their services. And that then becomes a lot of rich data, which then feeds into the formal financial system for credit and other solutions. In this particular pandemic, I'll just give one example, where we partnered in June this year with a cooperative, and we helped farmers who were selling, and we helped them even deliver lychees. So it was supporting Vietnamese farm product, and in the first 8 hours, we sold 8 tons of lychees, which is something that we never thought we'd be able to sell through our platform. But I'll pause there, and maybe we'll hear from the others.
I mean, it's really interesting to hear about the challenges that businesses face. You talked about just buying marketing on Facebook. I talked to a technology company in Singapore the other day, and this is from a Singapore perspective. The founders were helping businesses go online, and they were using their credit cards to buy ad time, and eventually they couldn't buy ad time because their credit cards maxed out or were flagged for fraudulent transactions. So even the very basic services at the bottom of the pyramid for the MSMEs are sometimes taken for granted, but can really be a challenge. Moving further up, we've got Nicholas, and you play a slightly different role here, because you're now towards more of the digitalized supply chain. And again, this is another area where SMEs really do need help, and that's where you sit. Nicholas.
Absolutely. I think, like Anthony rightly mentioned, that when it comes to lending traditionally, it was all about taking collateral, financial statements, making it a very onerous process for the SMEs. When we went about doing our business, we said, what can we do differently? And the whole idea came about, let's use alternate data to lend monies to the SMEs. If we think about the pandemic, the world came to a standstill. Some countries went into lockdown for a couple of months, some went into lockdown for more. And when we came out of it, SMEs wanted to do work. Some of them wanted to supply gloves and hand sanitizers to the hospital. Others wanted to, send workers back to the shipyards and the dockyards, and they needed capital. And that's where we tried to straddle the supply chain, saying that, look, when an SME wins a contract, can we finance the contract? Because nobody helps them right then. Once that contract starts invoicing, can we get into a digital form where they can start invoicing with us to improve their cash flow? And finally, when they need a little bit extra unsecured working capital to grow their business, can we step in there? So the idea is to straddle the entire supply chain, give the option back to the SME, make it a pay-as-you-go model so that we can be a partner to growth. And that's how we try and do things differently from a traditional lender, where the process is a lot more onerous, there is a lot of collateral required. And I think that's our role in being a growth partner for SMEs.
So Haryanto, from a bank perspective, I mean, banks have been lending, since the beginning of time. But you're also in this space helping SMEs, and I think that's particularly one of the challenges that you face between helping the SMEs adopt technology as well as helping them with the underlying financing.
Yeah, Robert, that's actually a valid statement because banks usually are taking on the higher side of the SME. There are some points that we are taking action in terms of helping them. The first thing is actually how the bank can reach out to the debtors, how the bank can reach out to the customers, because we are still utilizing the branch network. And by reaching them out, we can providing them with a valid restructuring scheme, because usually the higher end of the SME will need the restructuring scheme during the hard times. And one thing that we are providing them is actually, instead of giving them the one-size-fits-for-all restructuring scheme, we are thinking about the customization of each of the potential customer on how do the restructuring based on their latest condition. And the second point is also we are providing them with the partnership with the fintech and how to elaborate more on the business. We are not stopping any lending schematics, but we are still opening the lending disbursement and partnering with fintech in order to helping the SME during the hard times.
Thank you, Haryanto. Michael, very different in your space because it's no longer about financing or restructuring. It's actually investing, and investing is always about growth. Yeah. So I think maybe over to you in terms of what's happening.
Sure. So for us, it's kind of interesting. We have both our startups that we invest in actually become SMEs at some point in time. So for us, they're an SME market as well. But on the other hand, all of our tech companies, or most of them, are actually serving the SME market as a business. So one of the trends that we've been seeing more and more, and our colleagues from the banks also notice that startups have decided to provide financing services for their SME partners. So if you look at consumer marketplaces, if you look at certain SME businesses, you're seeing more and more that they're providing lending services to their merchant partners as well. And whether it's by providing a loan book, whether it's by working together with banks or working together with underwriters, it's a big trend we're seeing. So the support for merchants and SME companies across the region doesn't only come from banks, but startups are playing a more and more significant role in that part as well. If I look at our perspective as a venture capital firm, for us it's important to look at high risk, high reward. So we typically wouldn't do debt. For us, investments mean investing in equity and looking for that high reward at some point in time. And that's why we try to support our startups as much as we can, but even go to the fact where we can support their customers when it comes to SMEs and find a way to provide more services for them.
I'm going to come back to you on that point about support within the ecosystems, because I think when we look at the whole ecosystem for SMEs, it's all parts. It's banks, it's venture capital. It's interesting that you say that SMEs are actually looking to provide support. And I think the question we'll ask later is, are there any players in the ecosystem who aren't pulling their weight at this point in time? Coming back to the point on data, when you for data decisions and data-driven functions, technology adoption always comes with data. And I think maybe one of the interesting areas would be to look at how data is used in the different roles that you use to support SMEs and how critical it is to whether you can even perform your functions. I'm going to pass this back in the order I started with. Anthony, over to you.
Sure. So I think, again, since we deal with MSMEs, it's that transition from individual to micro SMEs. And therefore, even in some of the individual payment patterns, we have enough to enable a credit line. And we saw this even in the Philippines, where in a former life, where retailers worked with the largest wholesalers and used this. And we stumbled on this, actually, because it was supposed to be an individual credit line. But we found that it was being used clearly for working capital. Now, the other piece is that we have, beyond the data, what we also provide is we have a chat platform within the app in Momo. And we've built an escrow service. And we've partnered with logistics and delivery companies. So, every part of that process is being addressed so that ultimately we collect enough, because, people don't organically start sell. Some of it, yes. But I think it's the identification of when an individual is transitioning into that small business, and then we have to identify them as such, and then support them with all the tools that they need and double down into that. That's how we generate the data that we then feed to, other larger fintechs that are specialized in SME financing, or banks for that matter, or others who may be wanting to access this space of businesses.
So Niklesh, again, clearly a role that you play in Validus, which is looking at the data from the supply chains and how that can actually be used. Again, how critical a role is that? Because one of the things that we've heard repeatedly or previously when we've had discussions with the panel is you can't trust your customer, so you need the data to build that trust in the customer in terms of validating what he's actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely, Robert. When we started the business, we said, look at the SME financing gap. It's 20 billion in Singapore, it's 100 billion in Indonesia, and the numbers are in that range across ASEAN. Now, why does that gap exist? Because when an SME comes to you with unaudited financial statements that they could have cooked up in the back room, how do you trust that? Run any algos on it, garbage in is garbage out. And that's where we flip the problem on the head, saying, why don't we catch the SME at the point of transaction, finance that transaction, and then let's build a relationship with them. And that's where the whole concept of alternate data comes in. When we look at our business, we look at it as multifunctional channels, which could be supply chain financing, which could be connecting to other ecosystems, just like what Anthony spoke about at Momo, which could be connecting to e-commerce platforms, supply chain financing platforms, basically anybody who aggregates SMEs and has alternate data on them. All of that flows through a credit engine which underwrites it, which is then connected to a pool of capital that I manage. And that is where the power of data comes in. And that's why we're always hungry to see what data can be used for underwriting an SME. It doesn't have to be financial statements. If it's a small chain of restaurants, can I look at how much raw material they're buying, and what is their payment behavior to their raw material suppliers? If it's a logistics firm, can we look at how much goods they're moving, and again what is their pattern? So any information which tells me how an SME's business is doing is good enough for me to start underwriting them and to support them in that growth journey.
So Haryanto, at your level, the SMEs are probably a bit more sophisticated. They're dealing with a bank, but you go actually to help them in terms of process re-engineering and then taking the data from that process re-engineering to see how their businesses are performing. So that data again is relevant to how you lend and how you support these businesses in terms of their initiatives. Maybe you'd like to just jump onto that.
That's correct, Robert. Actually, I'm taking in on your last comment about the trust. I think trust needs to be built. And by opening your data to the banks, actually banks can help the customers by providing them with some advice, of course. For example, how the clients can have much better efficiency by looking at the productivity data, by looking at financial data, because we are still underwriting much of the higher SME client one-on-one. And if the clients open up their data and the bank has a lot of data, those data aggregations can be translated into the industry trend, which is the bank can use to identify which industry have more resilience or more potentials for more lending disbursement during these hard times, Robert.
Michael, again, where you are coming from is slightly different because you're coming from an investor position.
Yeah.
And so whilst the SMEs that you invest in or support will have to provide you data, ultimately the kind of businesses that you have been investing in have visibility of their customer.
Yeah.
So their customer visibility and the data that they get from their customers must become an important part when you make your decision as to whether this is a company worth investing in.
Absolutely.
Maybe the role of data in that part.
Yeah, for us, data is the most important part of our business. We're unable to make any decision without it. There's actually two layers of data for us. On the one hand, there is data that is provided by whether it's the SME that we invest in or data provided by data partners. So more and more we're seeing that there's data available that is outside of the company. So as an example, if we invest in an e-commerce company or in a marketplace or in a logistics company, of course we can look at the stats that we're getting from the company itself. But more and more we have the ability to look at other data sources. So for instance, we'll look at their customers and the data that they provide us. We'll look at their suppliers and the data that they provide us. We'll look at general public data that we can use. So for us, data is the essential part in terms of making decisions. And I think also SMEs should generally realize that the moment that you are working with a Validus or a Momo and you are a data provider to them, there are other sources for them as well to look at, are these data points that you're giving us, are they valid? And is it something that we can build on as a company? So just be very aware of, being transparent in your own data is crucial, but also making sure that, people are looking at other data sources as well when it comes to looking at your business.
So we're looking at the tools that are necessary to help SMEs, and basically from the panel, we understand that with those tools in place, you're all there, ready and geared to support the SMEs in different parts of the value chain and different parts of their life cycle. But I think the big question is, when it comes to SME, technology adoption is always the challenge. It's one thing to have the tools, it's another thing to know how to use the tools. So I think one of the challenges that we face, and it's across the region, I think it's globally, is how do we help SMEs use the tools that we have effectively? How do we help them adopt them and actually therefore generate the data that you're talking about? So maybe I'll start in a bit of a different order. Haryanto, in terms of helping the businesses adopt tools, I know you do both digital tools as well as all the way down to process re-engineering and in fact manufacturing tools. Maybe starting with you, how does the bank handhold businesses through this process?
Yeah. For the lower end of the SME, we are partnering with a fintech provider, which is we provided the lower side of the SME with the tools to do the digital journaling, for example. And the other case is actually we are providing them also with the digital POS. Both are the partnership that we do. The goals are of course to make the adaptation of the technology much better for the lower end of the SME. And for the higher end of the SME, we are trying to provide them with the value chain tools, whereby we can have a stream of data and confirmation from the bigger principal, and then the transactions to the middle end of the SME. That are some cases that we did.
Validus, Niklesh, you are working in the supply chain, so you've got big buyers who are keen to roll out the technology, but that's just from the big buyers' perspective. If you actually look at the other end of the spectrum, you've got to actually translate and help people come onto those platforms in order to get those data. What do you do to handhold SMEs in this space?
Thanks, Robert. I think the idea is not to push the SME towards technology, but educate them that using technology will not only help them, of course, improve their own business productivity, but maybe get financing at a much better rate. So we tell the SME that, look, if you are just giving me hard copy financial statements, it doesn't work. Everything you have to give to me is digital. I have partners, which could be online accounting software providers like a Xero. These could be procurement platforms. If you're giving me a scanned copy of a new contract that you have won, I need to, OCR it, and then there is always a fraud risk. If I get that from, let's say, a financing platform like a Proxtera, which has just been unveiled during the FinTech Festival, then I know that purchase order contract is true. I can finance it in minutes because there is no fraud risk, and therefore, the lower the risk, the better price I can give to you. So that's a process of educating the SME that, look, the more digital you are, the more true the data is that everybody can access about you, and then better the quality of services, whether it's from a financing partner or maybe any other partner who helps an SME in that growth.
Michael, to you first. In terms of the companies that you've been investing in, I know many of them have products that go out to the SMEs, and really the differentiating factor on how readily or how easily those products can be adopted must be a factor for you in terms of deciding whether to invest in those companies.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely look at the onboarding process, and to the earlier panel's point, you can't just dump a bunch of technology on an SME and say, well, use it and you'll be fine. So the education process is one of the most important parts of it. So what we tend to do is when we look at companies and we look at how they are interacting with their clients and their SMEs is your product right to fit? And is your customer, your client at a level that they are able to use your technology? So to give an example, we have a company in Indonesia which does online invoicing for micro businesses across the country. The difficulty for them is that their customer base is coming from pen and paper, and they're now for the first time using technology to run their invoicing. This is a big difference. So it doesn't make any sense to have like a huge CRM application and say, well, use it as of tomorrow. So you start simple. You start with a very small, lightweight invoicing business that allows them to onboard their paper invoices into an online system. Then you slowly go to invoice tracking, and then you slowly go to invoice payments. So you kind of take the SME on a journey and help them sort of create the technology stack within their own business. But that journey is relatively paced, and education is a big part of it.
Anthony, you've had experience in more than one country in trying to get even foundational technology adopted by SMEs. You've had successes, you've had failures, you've had challenges in these. Over to you.
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to pick up on what Michael said in terms of the onboarding process and the journey. Because it's important that, I mean, just like everything we do in technology, right? The easier you make it and the lower the cost of entry, adoption sort of comes with it, right? So we start with the most basic. It's not it's not the fanciest, but even an offline QR code with a sticker, right, where you don't need to invest in a device, right, or a 15-minute onboarding remotely enabled for online payment acceptance. Then we watch organic moves. So if we see on our P2P platform, if we see greater than, say, 25 received payments, right, that gives us an indication that this is probably a business, right? And that's where we start doubling down. So we look at people who are anyway using the platform in some way which seems akin to a business. Then we start looking at targeting those individuals and onboarding them as merchants. Then we start looking at marketing tools for them. As I said, selling ads on Facebook is one, but actually using our platform with digital vouchers or even our mini app. But that's a little more sophisticated because you need a little more tech ability there. But it's really part of that journey. And then again, I mentioned earlier the escrow service, because to Haryanto's point on trust, for selling online, you do need to, and that's the origin of I guess, Alipay and Alibaba. But it's still not solved for the countries that I work in currently, or even some of the prior countries. And so we've been trying to journey from individual to micro SME, identify trends, and then build on tools targeting those participants in our ecosystem that we believe are graduating to more sophisticated forms of technology for their businesses.
So in terms of helping businesses recover, it's clearly quite clear from the conversation today that it's about injecting your services into that business and really being a partner in that business in terms of the recovery. Wanted to use the chance now to basically touch the panel on examples of where you've had success, or any particular examples you'd like to bring forward about companies that have been able to navigate this difficult time. I'll just pass this first to Haryanto.
Okay, Robert. If we are looking on the, I'll just use the public data about the restructuring itself. I think it's not about one or two cases for the banks. Because if you look at how the Indonesian economy right now, based on the data, we have approximately like 63 billion US dollar in the market that needs to be restructuring. Considering that number is huge, I think in terms of the real cases is actually by the end of the day, how we can navigate together with the customers on how we can pass this pandemic era, and then how we can do it together to survive and turn back the business. I think if we can do it with this kind of the scale that we are undergo right now, that will be a proven the biggest test case that we are having right now.
Anthony, you talked about lychees.
Yeah.
I think for those people who are familiar with the BSB Prospera initiative, it's always been about mangoes. But on lychees and other small businesses, maybe give us a couple of examples of how businesses have been navigating and succeeding.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the fact that Vietnam as a country has probably dealt with this pandemic the best, and therefore the real pain wasn't felt as much, at least on the level of the health crisis, right? So people still, yes, for a couple of weeks there was a lockdown, but not severe, and people are leading as normal a life. Now, no country is immune from economic impact because, again, countries are also dependent on each other, and therefore there were parts of the economy for sure that were impacted. I think the Lychee example was one where, which was early into the pandemic, where there was this real initiative to support Vietnamese farm product, right? And we've seen this, right, where sellers were very dependent on international markets. I think we needed to make it more sort of attractive for them to appeal to the domestic market, right? And that's where we have a perfect platform. We have millions of Vietnamese consumers who are coming on the platform at high frequency. And that's where we started working with Coop, because again, it's difficult to address them, one at a time when they're very small. So we worked with a cooperative that already organizes a lot of these informal sellers, and that's how we were able to, and we did it with the help of a local newspaper, and that's how a few of us got together to deliver this on the platform. The other way that I have seen that the platform has been useful is through direct disbursement, because sometimes with these relief efforts, and it's quite common for layers to have to take away some of the benefit that should ultimately go to the small business, while we have a direct disbursement platform, and that makes it very efficient and productive. Both from a transparency standpoint and just getting it directly to the beneficiary. So maybe those are ways in which we could help.
Nicholas, obviously the platform play is one of those areas where Proxtera is trying to be there. But before I go there, I just wanted to say, Anthony, we're really with the challenges that everybody has faced with COVID. I think nobody begrudges anybody who has been able to survive this well, and kudos to Vietnam. And we're really happy that the impact was not as felt as badly there. But over to you, Nicholas. In terms of connecting these platforms together, whether it's to trade locally or whether it's to trade internationally, I think this is one of those areas where Valdis is also part of the Proxtera initiative, because the recognition that in order for SMEs to really flourish, you need to have a multimodal and multi-connector across this area. Maybe to you on this point.
Yeah, absolutely, Robert. So when we started, we mainly focused on domestic trade, which is local SMEs supplying to local corporates, because it was a closed-loop ecosystem within a country, and therefore a lot easy to finance. But cross-border trade is something that we've always had an eye on. But then there were always questions around, look, if things go wrong, how do I trust the buyer? How do I trust the supplier? Who kind of steps in and solves all these problems for me? We are a technology company. What we want is data to come to us, quickly underwrite it, and start helping these SMEs. And that's when a platform like Proxtera comes in, which is backed by the central bank, in a country, therefore has a lot more coordination with other countries where buyers and suppliers are there. It's almost like a dream come true. So, when we got a chance to step in as financier, we grabbed the opportunity with both hands. And, earlier this week, we showcased financing a live transaction where there was an SME from Singapore, supplying goods and services overseas. They won a small contract. Digitally, the contract came to us. We underwrote, financed. The SME got, money the same day. And that is what you want as an SME, and that is what you want to do as a platform, which is you won a contract. You don't want to go around then trying to find out, can I finance it? Can I service it? Because somebody else will take the contract. Our job is to make the SMEs more competitive, to help them grow, to really, realize their dreams. And we love such platforms and ideas.
So injecting yourself into the businesses is one way to help them recover. Connecting the businesses together is another way to help the businesses recover. But I think the next question I would like to ask, and put this to Michael, because you see it from the top of the pyramid, is will the recovery be even? I mean, we were sitting here in a conversation just now before this panel looking at technology spaces where valuations were phenomenal. And here we are talking about SMEs who can't get enough money to keep the lights on. Yeah. So will the recovery be even? And what do you see about that landscape?
So one, the recovery won't be even, and even more so, it will be very hard, and it will take some time. It's very interesting to see the difference between the tech and the non-tech businesses, and I'll just want to give one quick example. The moment countries went into lockdown, everyone assumed that the stuff that they can get from their retailer that they go through on a Saturday, they can still get it online. But if you look at it from the retailer perspective, within a few weeks, they had to shut down their business, think about their revenue, think about their staff, think about their brand, think about their product, and in the meantime, also go online. And then when they go online, they have to think about payments, logistics, inventory management, branding, who's actually going to build this website. So there were like a lot of issues in terms of switching non-tech SMEs to a tech platform. Now that for a lot of businesses has happened, what does it mean for their future? So what does it mean when economies open up again? So they now have a dual strategy, having your physical store and having your online store. But for instance, if you look at travel, a lot of travel businesses, they had to pivot also really fast. For instance, from international travel to domestic travel, or from international travel to local experiences. So all of these businesses had to pivot. Now, when economies open up again, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be back online from day one. For anyone that's traveling quite often, you're going to rethink going to another country for the next few months or even for the next year. You're going to rethink going to maybe even a big conference for the next year. So hybrid conferences will be a thing for a while. So in that sense, different industries will have a different pace in terms of coming back online. I do feel that technology as an enabler has shown the world that a lot is possible. So when it comes to supply chain financing, when it comes to logistics, when it comes to e-commerce, when it comes to travel, there's a lot possible that we can do with technology, and it's clear that it's here to stay. I think what is important now is that all of these SMEs that had to switch over the last few months in terms of being purely physical to being a hybrid or being online, that they need as much support as they can get to keep the business running over the next few years.
In terms of recovery, there will be those, and I think, Michael, you touched on it briefly, those who just won't be able to recover. The sector has changed, there's been a fundamental disruption. What's the role in that space? And maybe Haryanto, because you talked about restructuring large amounts of debt in Indonesia, there will be some companies where even restructuring is no longer an option. How can banks and investors help in that situation? Or is it merely just laying out the cards as they are to the company to allow them to recognize the challenges that they're in?
Okay, Robert. I'm starting with the good news first. Actually, we are, from bank's perspective, we are now seeing a little bit light in the end of the tunnel. Actually, we are starting to see that some of the potential customers are successfully getting through this. But of course, you're right, not all of them. But we are also preparing that some part of the customer or some part of the portfolio will not survive during this pandemic area. To answer your questions, actually, there are a lot that the financial institution can do. Let me give you the example that for the higher end of the SME, for the example is how can banks can help them to find the new investors, and how the new investor can help them to survive the business. That's just one example case on how the financial institution can help the existing customers.
So we've got different players in different spaces here, and I know, Haryanto, that the bank works with fintech companies. But one of the things that really needs to be done is for all of the technology players to really interact with each other and work together to deliver the value to SMEs and help them collectively. I think we used the term previously about recycling lost opportunities, whether it's a lost opportunity in financing into investment or a lost opportunity in terms of providing debt because you're the wrong institution to provide that debt. That requires you to share data across organizations and across different functions. What would you like to see for 2021? If you took the lens forward to next year, what would you like to see as a concrete step that an SME could take in 2021, which maybe they haven't taken in 2020, or a step they've taken in 2020, and what's the next step after that? Anthony, what would you like to see for 2021 from SMEs?
I'd like to see them start to accept payments electronically, and I'd like to see them use some of our tools to help drive consumers or businesses whom they sell to the platform. I'd like to see that we get them to a place where we can provide some indication to financiers, because we really see ourselves more as a platform to financiers or investors, so that they become attractive for these financiers or investors to do business with.
Nicholas, over to you. Closing thoughts on 2021. What would you like to see concrete steps that a SME could take?
Sure. Robert, I would like to see the SMEs become a lot more demanding. If you look at consumers and large corporates, they are very demanding. They know exactly what they want. SMEs are standing right at the end of the queue. So, if I'm an SME and I don't want to stand at the end of the queue, I want to demand, from the bank saying that, look, if you are not going to service me, you have my data for the last 10 years. Can you package it, give it to somebody else who can maybe service me? I want the SME to maybe go to the governments and saying, you have so much data on me, on the taxes I'm paying, on the levies, on my track record. Can you put it in a central database that a startup can access and maybe service me? So I just want the SME to stand up and saying, hey guys, do something for me.
Very nice. Haryanto.
From my side, I would like to see the continuation of the technology adaptation because I think that will bring us together into the new era. And of course, I would like to see the level of partnership between banks and the fintechs is also increasing, and how we can do the data integration, we can do the recycling of the potential loss much better than we are right now.
Michael, you're in the studio with me. You can see the clocks running down.
Yes.
You're 2021.
I'm really hoping that the ones that are providing finance, and whether it's a VC, a bank, a startup, it doesn't matter. But I think anyone that is providing financing to SMEs, I really hope that people will get also their hands dirty, help the entrepreneurs, just make sure that they're not alone, but we're there for them to help them.
So at the start of the conversation, we talked about whether or not banks and investors were doing enough. Clearly, you are all doing a lot. But I think the challenges that SMEs face require us to continue with those efforts because more needs to be done. So again, I'd like to thank the panel and thank Singapore FinTech Festival for having us this morning. And I turn it back.